Thank you. Thank you for coming out on a rainy day. And like I said before, somebody stole my line. This is about water today. How did you like that video? Yeah, wasn't that great? That's by Carl Swenson from Norwell. He's a pilot and a photographer, among his other skills, and that's one he took in 2003. I also want to I'll point out my son down over there, John. He's a teacher in the Scituate High School, Scituate school system, and his wife is in the school system. And there are two kids that are in the Scituate school system also. A couple other people I want to thank, we'll see it in just a second. Susanna Green, who did the cover for my book, and it was based on a photo by Gary Banks and Bill Richardson. I think it came out really well. As usual, they're local, wonderful people. This is kind of a local project for us. So let me get started. There's a picture of the cover on the left. Here's a kind of an agenda. I will be talking about a few vital statistics for the river, some history. There's a lot more in the book. Its uses, to summarize, it was used as a highway, both by Native Americans and by English settlers. And then, of course, for fishing, for salt marsh haying, shipbuilding has probably gotten the biggest attention of its uses on the river. And then it survived a number of threats. First of all, the industries that were built all along the river or its tributaries. Its 1870 reclamation plan, which I'll be talking about, which kind of is the heart of the book, to me. And the 1898 storm, it survived and changed its course, and we'll talk about that. And then there are a few lessons for us today in a world of climate change and flooding. So then I'd be happy to take your questions. Okay, so vital stats. It's located north of the South River. That's why it's called the North River, as far as I could tell. It's shaped like a dipper. You can see here, it's like kind of like that. Upside down U is another way to describe it. And that includes part of the South River there too. We'll talk about that later. It's 6 towns are involved. It's got a watershed of 59,000 acres. As I pointed out to somebody, that's bigger than the area of Greater Boston, and it's bigger than Walt Disney World in Florida. And it's probably bigger than that too, because I had a question at one of my other talks about whether it covers the old naval airfield called Southfield up in Weymouth. And evidently there's little traces of it there that trickle into the North River. I didn't know that. It's a tidal river, which means it's affected by the tides. It goes up and down. We'll talk about that. And it's 12 miles long. And actually the tide affects it its entire length. And its slope, I thought, well, how steep is this? It's not steep at all. It is almost flat. In fact, I was wondering how any of that water gets from one end to the other. It's pretty strange. Here's a great photo from Gary Banks and Bill Richardson, looking up towards the Union Bridge, I think, between Marshfield and Norwell. And you can see all the, I could walk over here, see all this land over here. That's the salt marsh. And it's salt marsh hay growing in the salt marsh. Back in 1643, William Vassall, who was an early settler in Scituate and probably the wealthiest person in Plymouth Colony, settled along the North River, and he called it a fair river. Fair meaning beautiful, not just average. And he said it's navigable for boats 10 miles and hay grounds on both sides. And you can see the hay grounds on both sides here. So it's kind of miraculous this thing has survived or adapted or lasted this long in this good a shape. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. So there's a lot of history here. Well, before the English settlers got here, though. There was the American shad in the river, and it's very important. I didn't know anything about the shad before. I heard a talk from the North and South River Watershed Association. I think their Water Watch series, and you could go on their website and see this presentation from about a year and a half, 2 years ago, about the American shad, which still is in the North River. It's the largest form of herring. It's a member of the herring family. It swims in the ocean for 12,000 miles over about 4 years. Then it comes back to spawn as far up the North River as it can, or as far up any of the rivers along the east coast of America. It was actually exported to the west coast, where it's found a good home there too. But back in 1621, remember Squanto first met the English settlers that showed them how to plant shad and other fish next to their corn so they'd get fertilizer. And it's actually mentioned in some of the diaries from back then. And then it also made an appearance in the Revolutionary War of 1776. It was called, for that reason, it was called The Founding Fish by John McPhee, who wrote a great book. He was one of the country's best writers. Very readable. I highly recommend it. And he talked about the founding fish. And I'll have something to add to that. It's not in this book. But one of the problems is this fish, like all others, has to swim upstream to spawn, and it can hit dam barriers. Now, there's no dam on the North River itself, but there are on these tributaries that come in the streams, third herring brook, second herring brook, first herring brook. You know, they're called herring brooks for a reason, because the herring want to go up them. And a lot of them had dams, and some still do. So I asked my friend Skip, who's here, my friend and neighbor, I said, I don't know much about shad, but what do you know about shad? He said, it's a spectacular sport fish. It fights like crazy. And it is the Connecticut state fish, and they actually have festivals about it. It might have been, could have been the Massachusetts state fish, except we got the cod. And some of you may know, there's a image of the sacred cod that's in the House of Representatives at the state legislature. Well, what you probably don't know is that in the Senate, they have something called the holy mackerel. All right, here's a soldier, Joseph Paul Martin, just an ordinary soldier. He was in Valley Forge during the winter of 1977 to 78. Just freezing, almost hopeless. The start, really, of the military force that we had in the American Revolution. So he said our rations, when we got any, consisted of bread and salt shad. And he said the shad was as salt as fire, and the bread was dry. Then he moved in 78, he moved over towards the Hudson River near West Point, and he said, we had our good old diet of salt shad. Now, he got his salt shad, he left it outside in the meadow next to the meeting house, because he had to go in and do some business there. And when he came out, one of the cows was just finishing her meal on my shad. The last I saw of it was the tail of a fish sticking out of the side of her mouth. So I talked about dams and really industrial complexes that were built along the tributaries, and probably the best known one, and the most interesting one here to me, is the Stockbridge Mill. And this is a picture I took last year. This is the oldest grist mill in the United States. There is a database of mills, I think, or is it rivers? But anyway, it's number one. It's also the oldest dam, U.S. dam, which was built by 1640. That's a dam that's now at Old Oak and Bucket Pond that keeps the water in there most of the time, and also provides a source of water for drinking in Scituate. But this kind of scene was replicated in many of the North River tributaries. Probably all 6 towns were involved. Well, some of those weren't towns then, but they all had a lot of activity, really. You pick any one of the herring brooks, probably had 3 to 5 different kinds of mills or dams or plants located there. Here's an example of one, as a clap rubber mill. I'm going a little outside of my scope, although it's covered in the book. A source of the North River is the Indian Head River, and that lies between Hanover and Pembroke. And at the time, back, Ludden's Ford, the name came from a guy in the 1600s named Ludden, who carried the Massachusetts governor across the river on his back. And that episode was mentioned back then too, so that's the history. But meanwhile, in 1873 to 1934, it's a pretty long time, was the clap rubber mill. And you might applaud them for recycling rubber, which is a great thing to do. The only thing is there were pollutants that were emitted from this plant. They're probably still located along somewhere underneath the shores of the North River. But this is a 1917 plant, so he shows you pretty much at the height of their operations. They had, you could count probably 25 different plants there, all different kinds. And you can see, pardon me for pointing, but here's the dam. There's some side channels like that one, and I think there's one over here. And then they had bridges that went up between the plants. And really from one town to the other, it's sprawled across 2 towns. So I thought I should stop by there, and I brought my son over there once too. It is a delightful place. Look at that.
Wow.
There's no plants. None of that building is left. And on the left side is in the distance is the Hanover side with the white bench facing us, and then the black bench here facing the other side is in Pembroke. But each of those is just fabulous place for picnic. This doesn't look great here because I took this photo back in March of 2024, last year, but it gets very green and all kinds of foliage comes in, and it's a wonderful place for picnic. I should go back. No. You might wonder where that is, because it's a little bit off track. Let's see if I can go back here. Previous. Okay. So, how many of you know where Previty's new place is in Hanover? Yeah, good. A lot of people know. Great place, great store. Well, if you go west from there, just about half a mile later, there's a split and a fork in the road. I'm almost always going to the right, but if you go to the left, just about a mile or 2 down the road, that's where these are. There's plenty of parking. It's very scenic. And if you want to go fishing for shad, I think you could probably do it there. I think that's actually a good place for fishing for shad. So, next, one of the other activities, industrial activities, some kind of industry was salt haying. They were gathering marsh hay since the colonial days. You know, when the English first got here, there were no fields of English hay, and there were no big farms. They had to feed their families. They had to feed their cows, because they had cows pretty early. They had to feed their other animals. So where they went to was down to the river. And along that river, remember that early photo we saw with all the salt marsh out there? They could use all that salt marsh hay to feed their cattle. And they also used it for thatch on top of the roof, and they put it on the sides of their houses or cottages to keep the winter winds out. So the salt marsh really provided a lot for them. Now they did plant farms, English hay, which they were used to from England, but that took years to cultivate and to get going. So salt marsh was very important right from the beginning. If you want to read more, there's a great book by William Gould Vinyl called Salt Marsh Haying on the North River. And he actually participated in some of that activity, so some of that's firsthand information. In this photo you see on the right is a horse, but originally they would use cows. Cows are cheaper, horses cost a lot more. But both could be used to transport the hay. Here, I don't know if they're taking the hay down from this pile and putting it in the wagon, or if they're taking it from another part of the salt marsh and just piling it up on this haystack. But this is pretty typical in this area along Massachusetts shores anyway. They built the hay up on staddles, which are these vertical posts down here. So they put all these posts in the ground, and then they build up the haystack on top of it. And then there was an art to that too. This guy's probably about 2/3 of the way through, but they had to kind of slope it towards the top so the water would run off. And then it wouldn't get wet on the bottom because of the staddles. So that's a term that I'd never heard of before, but it's very important. And pitchforks, of course. I think both these guys are holding pitchforks. And we're so lucky in Scituate to have the Cudworth barn. Here's my son John, holding 2 pitchforks. One of them in his right hand has got metal tines on it, but the one on the left is totally wood.
Wow.
I don't know if they had to find the right kind of tree growing and then cut it down that way, or if they just split it and then sharpened it up a little bit or whatever. But those are 2 examples of the kinds of implements that are in that Cudworth barn. And I don't know if they're coming. I think this weekend they have an open house, the 13th, Saturday or Sunday. But I don't know if this Cudworth barn is going to be one of them, but I'd certainly recommend it. It's actually it's just down the street about a block from here on the same grounds as the Senior Center. In the second photo from the left is a pole. You can see it reaches almost to the top of that Cudworth barn, and so I guessed it was, based on the size of my son, I guessed it was about 25 feet tall, which is way taller. You can see a picture of it, of a ladder here inside the barn that reaches almost to the top of that. So that was really tall, and so I think that this was used for the haystacks because it's way too tall. It's much taller than necessary to reach the second floor of that barn where you'd store the hay. So back to that long pole, that's called a hay pole, and you'd get 2 of them and 2 men, and they put them on the ground and slide them underneath the pile or stack of hay, and pick them up and carry them kind of like a stretcher over to where they wanted to put it, usually in a wagon or on top of a pile or something like that. So these are actual implements from a farm up in North and Country Way, anyway. And on the right is really rare. It's really hard to find these things, and it's hard to find good photos of them. So I went over the Cudworth barn one day, and I took photos of these things on the right, which are called, they have different names, but they put these on the feet of the cows so they would not sink into the marsh, because the marsh is kind of, well, marshy. And so these are called marsh shoes or bog shoes. There's probably other ways of doing it. And you can see they're you don't get these from a Sears catalog. You just kind of make these and fit them to your cows. And sometimes I guess you put them on horses too, but you don't want those cows to sink into the marsh. Some of them did. And so once you got to the hay, then you had to transport it. And one way of doing that is by this ship called a gondolo. It's a corruption of the term gondola in Italy, but it's not at all like them at all. This was used throughout New England to transport salt hay and other things. It's basically a big flat-bottomed boat that can go into water that's not very deep. So here it's out in a stream, but it could actually come up in most cases, right up to the riverbank, and then all the hay from that salt marsh could be just thrown into into the Gundalow. If you look closely at this photo, there's actually 3 guys, and 2 of them are steering or poling. They didn't really use like paddles. They might have used paddles, but mostly they used these long poles, and just kind of pushed themselves along through the river. Of course, timing was everything, because you don't want to be there at a big tide or a big storm or something like that. All right, shipbuilding got the most attention from writers here. Here's a great photo of the Helen Foster, which is the last decent-sized ship launched on the North River. It was launched off of Norwell, and it's off of River Street. There's a road called, what's the name of it again? Okay. Well, it's one of the first ones after the post office. It's on the left-hand side. And this yard, Chittenden, it's called, but at the end of Chittenden Lane is where the Chittenden yard was, and this is where it was built and then launched. You can see a lot of people turned out for this. I counted maybe a 1/10 of the whole population of Norwell turned out for that.
Oh, wow.
It was a big deal. And you can see these women on the right. That's why I like this photo. The women on the right have their hats on with their feathers sticking out. This was a festive occasion. And of course the crew and the captain were all up on the ship itself. It had American flag flying there, did not have the masts that would be attached to it later. That's after it was towed down the river, which was a really difficult task. But they towed down, and in Marshfield, probably one of those shipyards near the Bridgeway Inn, they would get their fittings, what they call them, masts and everything else that had not been included in the original build. And let's see, what else should I mention? It's a really scenic area. You can go to the end of Chittenden Road. There's a little overlook that you can look out over the river. It's very scenic. And a lot of that salt marsh you see in this photo is gone now, but this photo was taken, and actually there's several versions of this photo taken in 1871. This one's from the Norwell Historical Society, and this one has provenance, because I kept kind of bugging them about, well, where did you get this photo, and how do you know it's really a good photo? And they said, yeah, well, written on the back is the names of some of these people who were up in the boat, including on the shore, Helen Foster herself. So, and not only that, but this photo was taken from the grandson of, he owned it, he owned this copy of the photograph, so there's pretty good provenance for this photo. I mentioned Helen Foster. She married a shipbuilder named Merritt. He used her maiden name to name the ship. And then along came, not long after that, was Briggs Shipbuilding on the North River, a great book that talks all about that industry, and I highly recommend that. And then along came Merritt in 1938, who gave a narrative history of Norwell, and he talks about this ship too. It turns out he's the grandson of Helen Foster and Mr. Merritt. And I think both of them are buried in the graveyard up near, I guess what I call it, Norwell Center. You know, when you go up to the top of the hill and, anyway. So, well, I'll leave that there. Well, turning to canals, by the way, I've written a paper about canals on the North River, and it's coming out in the next few days, I think, on the Norwell Historical Society newsletter. But if you go to their website, I mean, if you're on their email list, you'll get it. But if you go on their website, you can download copies of the newsletter. So look for this in the next week or so. But it goes into a lot more detail about this. The earliest I found mention of a canal along the North River was a 1796 map of Scituate. And somebody had penciled in 2 parallel lines that went from the Hanover border all the way to the ocean. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's got to be a plan for a canal. And it would have cut out like 40 bends in the river. It would have made for a lot faster voyage. That didn't happen. In 1801, Scituate's town meeting authorized a tide mill in the harbor. It's kind of behind where the Watson hardware store is. Yeah, near the brook, next to the brook. So it was authorized there. It was actually built, but the town said, but you have to reserve room for at least 10 feet for a possible canal to come in there. So the idea of a canal was there for a long time. And in 1825, the Erie Canal was completed, and that was a huge success, both the way it operated and a financial success. They paid back their investors before the end of the terms of the bonds, so they actually did really well, and that caused a flood, pardon the pun, of other canals. 1829, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came around and considered a bunch of proposals. One was to cut through, let me do this. You can't see the detail, but this is the North River, and now this is what the South River is now. One proposal was to cut through the river right here, so you go right out to the ocean. The other was to put in this canal, and I think you can see it from back there in the back of the room, how straight this was. That went straight from the North River into the Scituate Harbor. And an alternative was to have it go over to those little brooks that feed into the harbor, so they wouldn't have to dig the whole canal. That was actually proposed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but it didn't go anywhere. And the reason is, and I go into a lot more detail in the book, there were these multiple plans that came up. Some people in Marshfield wanted one thing, some people in Scituate wanted another, other people in Scituate wanted another plan, and then there were the people in Norwell or South Scituate or Marsh or some other town that wanted even a different plan. So these got all bottled up in Congress. And finally in 1831, and this continued during 1831, but John Quincy Adams got involved, and there's a picture of him on the right. He was our representative at the time. He had been president, and he became a U.S. congressman representing Scituate, Norwell, Hanover, the whole South Shore. And so he got involved, and the great thing about, one of the great things about Adams is he kept a diary, and he's such a gifted writer, gifted diarist. We have all these real detailed descriptions of his visits to Scituate and to Marshfield, who he met with, what the people were trying to get him to agree to, which were usually opposing plans for the canals. And so he wrote about those, and those are in my book. And quotations from it will also be in that newsletter from the Norwell Historical Society. But that didn't go anywhere. Again, I think it's because of political problems, but it actually did get proposed and recommended by the U.S. Army to Congress in a report in 1853. At the time, it's kind of funny, but the Department of Defense was called Department of War. It was headed by Jefferson Davis. And here's where the proposed canal would go. I marked up this, it's a much bigger image, and it's available online from National, I think this is from the National Archives, as long as they haven't taken it down. But this, it's this huge description, really detailed, done by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it shows you the fine work that they do, except there's a few errors in it, like they don't call it First Cliff, they call it First Bluff. But anyway, other than that, it's pretty accurate. And so I marked it up here to show, here's the river, this is looking north, so here's the river, here's the line of the canal, and you can see it on the original, but I've just marked it, made it larger to look like, so you can see it. And it went almost to Scituate Harbor, but here it connected to those little streams that lead into Scituate Harbor, which were probably deep enough for any navigation. So it would have been good for navigation. You could bring your boats, if you're still shipbuilding, in 1853 it was pretty late in the season for that, but you could bring your ships down here, and instead of going down where all these shoals were, all the congested areas of this, what's now the South River, you could just cut through here, and then you'd be out and you'd be very close to Boston instead of having to go all the way around 3 miles south and then 3 miles north in the open ocean to get up to the same spot here in Scituate Harbor. So this was a pretty serious plan. But again, it didn't go anywhere. I think, again, because of a divided local support for this. Okay, so next we come to dams. And this, remember I talked about dams before and how it keeps the poor shad from being able to go back home and spawn. But there was never really a dam along the North River itself. But here in 1870, all of a sudden, here's a plan to put 2 dams in. One was kind of a minor one. It's up here, pretty much, it's in Hanover, but pretty much towards the start of the North River. But the big deal was this one over here at what was then close to the mouth of the North River. And the whole idea behind that was, this time, by now, the shipbuilding industry had pretty much gone away. So the other people that were important were farmers, property owners along the North River, and they wanted to turn the salt marshes into fresh meadows. Well, what that meant is putting up a dam, really where I pointed there, put the arrow. And that would basically, as I put it, keep out the salty ocean, keep in the fresh water, and then occasionally, if it needed to, the water would flow over the dam into the ocean, but it would turn that whole area into fresh water instead of salt water, like it is today. You know, it's salty. It's not real salty, but it's salt all the way up to its origin. This would have totally changed the landscape around there. It would allow these farmers to grow other crops, hay, corn, tomatoes maybe. I don't know what else could grow in these things. And it would have turned the salt marshes into fresh meadows or farms or whatever. And so like that image that we saw early on, the airplane photo, the photo from the airplane, you wouldn't see all those anymore. That would be probably houses or farms or something like that. And this plan got supported by leading hydrographers. I have a lot more in the book about it, but hydrographers, 9/10 of them came through Harvard. And 9/10 of them lived in the Boston area. And these were some of the world's leading hydrographers, but they were certainly America's leading hydrographers. I mentioned some of the names later. But kind of Boston was the hub of the hydrography universe at the time. By hydrographer, I mean those people who are drawing maps of wetlands and oceans. So their function's kind of done by hydrologists today, and hydrologists are very important. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. So this, not only the scientific community came behind this, but also the Massachusetts Board of Harbor Commissioners. And they said, this is great. And they recommended it to the Massachusetts legislature. They did point out this was a chance for America to adopt some practices that have been going on in Europe. An example is the dikes used in the Netherlands. Remember the little boy who stuck his finger in the dike, that story? Well, they've been able to raise their land up that used to be underwater. And so guys in Massachusetts said, let's try that too. But it was, they called it an experiment. There was no question about it. It had not really been tried in any great detail in the United States. There was a place that did try this. It didn't happen here, but there was a place that tried it, and guess where? It's just south of here. It's on the Green Harbor River, and I talk about that. It's in the book. It's kind of a nice contrast. So anyway, where was this dam going to go? You see, this is a nice sketch. I think I'll do some more pointing here. This shows you the level of the water in the river. I think that's high tide and low tide. I'm not a hydrologist, by the way. Here's the level of the ocean. Okay, if you follow the dotted line, you see there's about well, it turns out to be a 20-inch difference. And they measured this carefully. These are the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the hydrologists, hydrographers, and there's about a 20-inch difference there. So they wouldn't have to go up for the dam. They wouldn't have to go up as high as the ocean, but they'd have to go up above this. So this, at the time, was the North River. So where was this? How many people know where the Bridgeway Inn is? It's great food. I had a great meal there while I was doing this research. So it was right there. And I have some photos that didn't come out quite as clear as I'd like in the book, but it shows you that if they built this dam, it would come up to about where the bottom of today's C Street Bridge is, the bottom of it. So that's pretty high, and that whole area would have been up to about the level of the road that goes by the Bridgeway Inn. So this would have been a big change. I mean, this would be a totally different universe from what we're used to today. And some of the leading hydrographers at the time, Professor Pierce of Harvard, Professor Mitchell, Professor Whiting, and then this new guy, Clemens Herschel, who came in and made his name as a scientist when he developed a way of measuring the flow of a river. And he developed that at the Holyoke Dam in Massachusetts. You take this, actually you could use this device that he developed and measure the flow rate of Niagara Falls. Just really, to me, that's like an unbelievable invention. So he became famous, but at this time he was the new guy on the block. And they needed the support, so Herschel came out with this plan in 1872, and a pretty good summary of it got published in a local paper. But it was written it's about 7 pages long, and I've included copies of his handwritten plan on my website that you can take a look at if you want. But it's great engineering details. How tall does this dam have to be? What's it made out of? It's made out of dirt. Where does it have to go? And the other thing that I don't mention here, to block up the river there would not be the final solution, because you'd have to keep the water from running over where that low point is, that now is the mouth of the North River. That was a low point. So he said, we've got to build a wall there too. And that was, he didn't call it a dam, they called it a dike back then. But this dike would have had to run, basically you're talking about from Third Cliff all the way down to Hummerock, all the way down Hummerock. So, it's a lot of engineering. The question was whether it's a viable business plan. His letter to the owners of land along the North River was, if you do this, if you think you can increase the value of your land from $20 an acre, from $12 an acre to $20 an acre, then you shouldn't delay. You should go ahead with this plan. Because at that point you could grow much better crops and make a lot more money. Other people had things to say about it. There were public meetings. This one was kind of the final one that I could find. That was to develop support for the plan. Meanwhile, Scituate voters had voted against this plan, but I think there were enough in Norwell and Marshfield to support this plan and go forward. So here, this poster comes out. They talk about reclaiming the marshes. I think that's an interesting way to put it, because nobody claimed, I guess the ocean claimed it before, so they're reclaiming it from the ocean, but it's kind of a soft way of saying we're going to basically keep the ocean out. What else do I want to, oh yeah, so here's the people who are supporting this. 11 prominent citizens from Norwell, South Scituate, and Scituate, and Marshfield. And the most prominent one that jumped out at me was Parker Welch. E. Parker Welch. Actually, I live on Parker Avenue. I was thinking of getting rid of that name when we first moved in there. I said, who's this guy, Parker? But he's the one who started the Welch Company, developed most of the property in Scituate, developed Third Cliff, Rivermore, the whole area there. So he was, and served as a public servant, maybe a selectman, I think, at some point. And his son, George Welch, was just as prominent in town. So this was a real prominent family. And you would think with his support, that would be enough. Didn't happen. I didn't find out why, but my personal thought was, well, there was a little detail. If they went ahead with this plan, the landowners along who are going to be benefited by this would have to post bonds or put liens on their property that if there was any problem with it, it could be seized. And I think they might have gotten cold feet. And I think they might have thought, well, yeah, there might be a business plan there, but this is kind of speculative. So they didn't go through with it. And by the way, it's 1873, I think, was a national recession. So it kind of put the thing to bed. So a few decades later, before the storm of 1898, here's what the beach looked like between Fourth Cliff and Third Cliff. Here we're looking at, this is taken from Fourth Cliff. That's the North River over there, making a nice turn south. That's Massachusetts Bay. And this is Third Cliff up here. And that was not only a beach, it was a path. It was the path to get from Third Cliff to Fourth Cliff, and for a lot of people to go from Third to Fourth Cliff. Some people thought, I saw someone mention that, an old record, that they liked the swimming in Fourth Cliff better than Third Cliff, so they used to come down that path in a horse cart. Yeah, this is a great photo that Harvard has. Shows you what things looked like back then. And I'd never heard of it. I never thought this might exist, but it's just a wonderful photo. And of course it's great, and it's got great detail when you go online. All right, then the storm of 1898 comes along, and this is a view from Third Cliff, looking out towards Fourth Cliff. Let me point out a few things. Here's the path that used to lead to that beach that went across there. So this was, I had neighbors who had property right about here, and they said, yeah, the driftway used to go down here, and then then the road used to go down over to Third Cliff, or Fourth Cliff. This is a farm that was there. I don't think those buildings are still there anymore. Mary, you live just on the other side of that. Mary and I live just on the other side of that, on Fourth Cliff. Very scenic. And I go into a lot more detail about that area in my book, On a Cliff. But this book is about the river, and here's a wonderful map that I discovered in the Massachusetts State Archives in 1915. Again, the engineers were at it. They said, you know, those guys in 1870 didn't actually figure out how deep the river was. So you see these things that look like a caterpillar crawling up the river. Those are soundings. So they went, this is just sheet 1 of 7. They did soundings all the way up the river. And actually, they went too far. They went up into the Indian Head River, too. But these guys are really thorough. And again, the question was, well, now that we have this opening here, what do we do with this? Should we dredge it? There are some other big plans. Should we build a canal? The idea of a canal came up again in 1915, if you can believe it, which actually was about the time that the Cape Cod Canal was being built. So, you know, it wasn't like an obsolete type idea. But they said, the engineers, and this was the Board of Harbor Commissioners recommending to the state legislature, they said, you know, it doesn't make sense to dredge, it doesn't make sense to do anything else, it doesn't make sense to put in a canal here. The only thing that makes sense is if you're putting in a canal from Narragansett Bay up through Taunton, up to Brockton, and that's not too far, the streams there are not too far from the North River, and then you could connect it all, so you could go right from, you know, Narragansett Bay out to Massachusetts Bay, and then it's not too far to Boston. It kind of makes sense on paper, but they kind of soft-pedaled this idea at the time. Anyway, this, I won't go into detail about this. This was fun finding this old map, and just sheets 1, 3, 5, and 7 have survived. If some of you find any of the other pages, let me know. All right, meanwhile, with all this drama there of the 1898 storm and everything else, people still enjoyed the area. Here's some nice photos from the Howard family, taken in about 1914. And Jack Howard was an outdoors person. He had a cottage on Trout Island, and he was a great photographer. And his grandson has converted a lot of these old photos that are in, I don't know, plastic or celluloid or something like that into digital images. So he's given permission to use these. So here's some kids clamming, boating. That's John Howard's grandmother rowing the boat. And in the background, I think that's Hummerock, and I think that's the old life-saving station, the U.S. life-saving station, not the Humane Society life-saving station. That burned down in 1915. So this photo was 4 years before. That shows it 4 years before it was destroyed. And then there was hunting along there too. That's, I think, another one of Jack's relatives who was out there in the bushes, I guess we call it duck blind or something like that. All right, so remember the 20 inches that I talked about? If this room were filled with water like that, you would probably be sitting in water because it's up to the top. That's up to the top of the seat on your chair. And you would probably want to be getting out of here. So 20 inches is a lot. So it was a lot for the North River when it happened in 1898. All of a sudden, you had 20 more inches of water there. And now you had much more direct tidal action. The tides would be coming in directly from the ocean instead of going up that narrow, what's now South River channel. And what it did is create these ghost trees. This photo, again, is from Harvard, and it's from 1911. They're called ghost trees, you can see, because they're white at the bottom. And it's not clear if that happened because, and they're you know, they have no leaves, so they kind of got killed. It's not clear if that happened because of the rise of the water, or because of the salt in the water, or maybe both. But these are what happened then. If you go out there today, which I've been out looking at Bear Island, and I think this photo is from Bear Island. There are ghost trees out there today. Whether they're some of these original ghost trees or not, I don't know. But it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. And I like this photo, again, because it shows, over here is a ditch that's built or dug into the salt marsh. And here's a brook that's going by. That's probably one, if you follow it over here a little bit, one way or the other, it'll lead to the marina that's off of the driftway there, across from the Widow's Walk golf course. Okay, ghost trees. Now, turning to more recent times, how did the scientists came in a few years ago? I met some of them. Brian Yellen gave a talk about this on the North and South River Watershed Association. and it's available on the website, and I highly recommend it. This is from February 2024 from their Water Watch series. And again, another photo from Gary Banks and Bill Richardson. But you can see, what are we looking at here? There's so it's a fairly recent photo. Looking at Fourth Cliff, right here. The Air Force Station would be up here. That is Trout Island. So you can see how close it is to Hummerock, but it's actually in Marshfield. And you see that the photo from rowing on the part of the river. You can see how close Hummerock is there. And this is the spit, and Third Cliff would be over here. So these scientists came from UMass Amherst. They were very interested in this, and the question they had, the basic question is, how did this inlet switch, when the storm of 1898 blew through here, how did that affect the marshes and the channels around there? And so they dug down, they took samples, they analyzed it, and they came up with some great information. And I'll try to summarize it here. Again, I'm not a hydrologist or a scientist or anything, but geez, I just love their work. They said that the marsh survived, and not only survived, but it adapted. And the reason was because it got a lot of sediment from the ocean. In other words, it kind of kept building up that salt marsh. So what we see today is probably the upper layers of what used to be there. But it helped. They were getting most of the sediment from the ocean waves coming in from Massachusetts Bay, and they were depositing sediment at a rate 3 times faster than sea level rise. So we don't have to worry about, if this happens with all of our marshes, we may not have to worry about recovery of salt marshes in an age of sea level rise. So there's hope. The other thing is that we want these salt marshes to survive because they act as a buffer between the ocean and people who live on the land and other activities on the land. And it's a pretty resilient barrier, so it can grow and adapt to the sea level rise. Unfortunately, in America, most of these salt marshes are gone. And you can see it by a study in 2024, the National Estuarine River Research study. It's a series of national scientific sites around the country. And there's maybe 25, don't hold me to that, but there's a lot of them. And I thought, they did a study using historical information, a lot of the maps from the Army Corps of Engineers from the 1800s, to see what were things like back then, what it's like now. And what's like now is much worse. We've lost a lot of salt marshes. So then I thought, it has good data for each of those sites that they're talking about. Now these sites were not selected because they're big or large or small, or what. They're selected for other reasons, but I thought I'd see how many square feet are there compared to the ones in the North River. And the North River ones are like way, way above that. So we have a little, almost a hidden secret here of a huge salt marsh. Well, if you want to go in Massachusetts, the record is in the Great Marsh, north of Boston. It's just so huge, it just dwarfs any others. But we might be, in the North River, we might be number 3. Okay, so just to give you a few more reflections, the river's so scenic. I just like watching that video that we started with today, and had advice to cherish its flow, which I think is a great way to put it. It's historic, with timely lessons for today. I mean, it's not just what's happened in the past, it's what can happen to us today, and an age of climate change. And, you know, I was worried about flooding. We worry about flooding because we're in Scituate, we're next to the ocean. I worried about flooding for this river because the floods can come in, although it's nothing like what's happened in Texas. But you have to wonder, you know, what happened in Texas is they have these federal insurance rating maps, FIRM. And we have those in Scituate. You know, in fact, when we first moved in here, we had to get insurance that was based on the flood insurance rating maps until we could get commercial insurance. We got state insurance. So these maps, as pointed out this week, they're not predictive. They just tell you what's happened in the past based on certain past data, which is kind of limited. If we want really predictive maps, we got to fund these maps from the government, the federal government, and we've got to fund more research about these. For example, they have warning, they have things that measure water depths and flood levels in streams. Well, those are just some of them, and they don't coordinate them, and they don't figure out, well, if this stream is raised 2 feet, is that going to mean, or if we get 2 inches of rain, or is that going to mean 20 feet of flood downstream? So there's a lot of things we can do to help prevent environmental problems and tragedies in the future. So anyway, I think for these reasons, I think we have an environmental landmark here, although it's not really it's kind of on the land, but it's kind of on the river, and it's kind of in the marsh. So I'm not quite sure what to call it, but it's an environmental important river. Okay, a few books if you want more research. If you want to do more research, this is a hot topic today. I'll go back a few years to a book called The Longshore by John Stilgoe, who lives in Norwell, and he's a Harvard professor. Really well written, and it deals with our area, the North River area. He builds boats like that, and he sails up and down the North River. Annie Proulx came out 2 years ago with Fen, Bog, and Swamp. Same thing, except without the salt marshes. This is more like inland marshes, but again, really well written. And a book I'm reading right now is A River Alive by Robert Macfarlane. Again, one of the world's greatest writers right now. This is probably his 10th book, and it's fascinating. Shall we treat rivers like people? Are they due any kind of protection? And if so, how? And he's like a cross between a writer and a poet. So it's really fun reading, I have to say. So I want to thank a whole bunch of people. Very quickly, including those federal agencies who are being underfunded or being cut, because that provides so much scientific data that we can use to help us appreciate what we have and to avoid catastrophes in the future. And I won't read all this, but North and South River Watershed Association, I encourage you to get involved with them. They are just a wonderful organization. And thank you to the Senior Center here for hosting me. With that, I mentioned that the book is available on Amazon. It's also available right here in this room. If you want to pick up a copy, a representative from Buttonwood Books in Cohasset is here, and that's another place that you can buy this book. And I have a lot more information about the North River and the marshes on my website. And again, cover of the book on the right. So I'll take your questions. Let's see, if somebody would turn on the lights, I think that would be helpful. And I think I will take a minute here just to turn back to that video that we had. Let's try this again.
Can you replay the video while we do questions?
I'm going to try. It's It's stuck. Oh boy. I'm gonna get out of this and start it over again. I can try repeat. Yeah. Oh, I have to do that too. Okay, that's it. I'm going to turn down the sound a little bit on that if I can too. Okay. Okay, that's it for the talk. Formal talk, anyway. Questions? Yeah.
The mouth of the North River.
The mouth of the North River is right between 3rd and 4th Cliff.
Where's the head of the river?
The head of the river, the source of the head of the river is, oh gosh, I should have it.
Does it come from the Dyken River?
No, yeah, the head, it comes from the Indian Head River.
Indian.
Yeah, so if you go up to Previties, that you're pretty close to where the river starts. There's a there's a brook called Herring Brook that comes in. It doesn't even have a number on it. It's just called Herring Brook. And actually in Pembroke, they have this herring run every year, and they have a big ceremony and everything. It's a big deal in Pembroke. So that comes into, that's also one of the sources. So that's probably technically where the North River starts.
And are they spring fed? Is it like a spring fed?
No, that's a good question. I don't know if it's spring fed. It's fed by the tributaries, the streams that go into it, but those are probably fed by springs. Yeah.
When I first moved here 20 years ago, my wife and I went for a walk down by, in Scituate where a condominium was being built. And we went, they were pumping water into they were trying to get rid of water so they could build the condo. Yeah.
Oh, by Kennedy's, yeah.
Sanctuary.
Yeah, the sanctuary, right?
Kennedy.
Yeah.
Sanctuary. Across from Kennedy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. No, not across from Kennedy, just right.
Across from Widow's Walk.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, James Way.
So anyhow,
James Landing.
and there was a Ingrid who was like trying to get to the grass. And I don't know why the town would give the people a permit to build. It's just not right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen. Let me.
I don't want you to
No. Well, what I talked about in the book is at least there's some sensitivity today about environmental issues. That wasn't true back in 1870 when this dam was proposed. They didn't use that terminology, but I don't think they even thought that way. So we're lucky to have the environmental movement, but it's not a total solution. We have to keep alert. And let me give you an example. Besides what happened 20 years ago, what happened last week is somebody introduced a bill in the legislature to abolish the North River Commission.
Patrick Kearney.
The North River Commission is set up by the North River Act in 1971 to protect the river. And we have representatives from each of the 6 towns that make up this North River Commission. And I've been there. That poster that you saw, that was posted in their place. I wouldn't know about that kind of stuff without visiting them. And so they're doing good things, but somehow this bill is proposed to just get rid of it. I don't think it really costs anything, not much anyway. For the value that we have in this river, I think we ought to be trying to preserve the North River Commission. So if you go in the North and South River Watershed Association, North and South River Watershed Association website. They'll have more information about this, but you have until the 15th,
Yeah.
it's like Monday, to provide any comments on this
Why do they
bill.
want to cut it?
They want to
No.
put it in the hands of local town conservation commission.
Yeah, they want to delegate it to town conservation commissions, which are probably already busy enough.
That's what I emailed.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, my daughter-in-law's here.
yeah, I emailed Patrick Kearney as soon as I heard about the
Good.
bill when we were in Maine, just to oppose it. And I was
Yeah.
meant to forward it to you, but I figured you would bring it up.
Yeah. Right. Environmentalism is not dead. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, really appreciate it.